Hello, and welcome to Things You Should Know About Verdance. I do things that aren't just me playing Talasha. I try to make sure that they're in some way like constructive or interesting, not just clickbait shit, because the world does not need more clickbait shit. And also because clickbait shit is completely pointless to me because I make zero money off this. So, what would be the point? Um, I've had a few discussions with people recently who are very unaware of some of the strange little nuances and iterations of the rules that kind of affect Verdance more than other heroes. They can apply to others, especially, I guess, Florian, who shares a lot of the card pool. But I'm talking about this very Verdant centric because that's what we're here for. So I'm going to go through the ones I can remember. I've prepared lovely little cards, so please enjoy the high production volumes on this one. So we're starting off with talking about Verdance's ping effect. So the starting point is this is a May, and a lot of people don't catch that, surprisingly. So when this goes off, you have the choice of whether or not you want to put that trigger on the stack, which is really important if you don't want to use up AMP. That's it, basically. We're now going to elaborate about how to not use that AMP up anyway so that you can maximize these triggers. So, channel the Millennium Tree. At the beginning of your action phase, AMP 3. That is the important line of text on this in terms of avoiding it. What people don't realise is that these actually use the stack because it's a trigger, and by being a trigger, it forces a reaction window, which means you can do non-action speed things, i.e. instants. And what that means in terms of channel Millennium Tree is you start your turn, you place this on the stack, and then you can layer a sigil over the top of it, for example, as an instant. And by layering that over, you will proc a Verdance trigger that the channel cannot see. And you can resolve the sigil, then resolve the Verdance trigger, then go back to the channel of the Millennium Tree. And that will get you to a point where you hit your main phase and you still have the AMP 3. And you can obviously layer even more on top of that. You can go into putting your rampants in there first and keeping that tree all the way to the point where you want to hit, presumably like a Surgeon. So really good interaction to know just for sort of niche nonsense, I suppose would be a good description. Similarly, you have a lot of people who aren't aware how the rampant combo works. So when you cast rampant growth and life and you meld them, you resolve them effectively like you've put two cards on the stack. It doesn't leave the stack until both halves are resolved, but you can resolve life, and then there is a pause in the game before you resolve rampant. This is important because life will trigger the Verdance ping, which will resolve before the rampant goes off. Also important because you can stack rampants, as per this lovely diagram of them on top of each other, by going play a rampant life, resolve life, play a rampant life, resolve life, play a rampant life, resolve life, and then you have three rampants stacked on top of each other, and you can go rampant. And the important things there are, one, that all the Verdant pings will have already resolved and got out of the way, so they're not consuming your amp as you go and you get a bigger amp. Second thing is that each of them will have seen all three lives resolve. So they will get +3 from the healing, not +1, then +2, then +3. So quite an important thing to know. What you can also do is what this diagram was actually for is you can again trap things. So the interaction I wanted to kind of bring up here that a lot of people aren't aware of is that because the Verdance pings do sit on the stack, you can do things over the top of them. So in this instance, if you crack a healing potion, it gives you 2 life, and it will turn on a Verdance ping. And at the point you've got that Verdance ping, you can respond to it. So you can crack a healing potion for 2 life gain, get a Verdance ping, and then respond by playing 3 rampants and 3 lives over the top. Each of these will resolve for 5 amp, because they will see each of the rampant life plus the healing that has already resolved, don't forget, and give you 15 amp, and then you can resolve the Verdance ping. And this can be very, very important because you can obviously stack up a lot of life gain with no arcane damage spell in sight and still get a huge ping. If you do triple healing into Sigil into triple rampant, which is, a surprisingly easy hand to line up if you're playing a really slow game, you will get 37 damage off the Verdance ping, which is, is a lot of number, and doesn't require any other damage card present. So it's one of those, it's a line not everyone realises exists and can be very, very good if you're being disrupted. Somebody hits you with discard a card on the turn where you're going to go for that combo, and you go, well, I can actually just throw away my damage source or potentially the blue pitch because I don't really need it because I can just come off a Verdance trigger. And I think that's quite an important one to know because it's a slightly more advanced manipulation of the stack, and I think a lot of people playing are slightly unaware of what you can do with the stack in terms of, as I say, what I'm going to call trapping effects. Much like that tree trap. Trapping a Verdance ping is very, very possible. So that's that one. Now we're on to some negative interactions. Bonds of Agony. Searches your hand, deck, and graveyard for 3 cards with the same name as the chosen card it found in your hand. Something a lot of people aren't aware of is that Rampant Growth and Pulsing Ether are both taped to the side of a card called Life, and you have 6 copies of Life in your deck, assuming you're playing a normal build. If Bonds of Agony finds Pulsing Ether in your hand, what it can actually find is Life. Because the cards exist in a weird, I don't know, you call it quantum state. They're not called Pulsing Ether Life, they are called Pulsing Ether, and they are also called Life. So they are physically 2 card names that are separate card names, if that makes sense. So the long and short of this is never, ever let Bonds of Agony see a Pulsing Ether in your hand. You will lose your Rampant combo, which is probably quite important in the Ninja the Assassin matchup. Just to quantify that, we have text. Text. Everyone likes reading it. So the important part of this basically is 9.2.2 and I guess 0.1, but a split card is a card of 2 names. It's considered a single card with the properties of both sides, except on the stack. So it has 2 names. What is kind of important is when you put it on the stack, you choose one of the 2 names, or you meld it for both names. So that is why it sees them. And as a follow-up, because this caused a lot of confusion with people wondering how censor works, when you put it on the stack, you can choose just one side, and it only has the text of that side. And then if you look at the bottom right text, 5.1.2c and 5.1.5, these are the order of how you resolve a card onto the stack. And because it's 1.2, where you choose what side is legal, and it's 5 where you check if the play was legal, censor will never see life if they name life. So you can't use censor or I've forgotten the name of the time stop thing that mechanologist has, but that as well. They will see it in terms of the mechanologist one preventing pitch, but they won't be able to stop you playing the half of the card they didn't name. So they can't go, I'm naming life and hitting 6 cards. They can only name, the thing they want to actually stop. Kind of interesting that you don't check a card's legal until about 5 steps in, right? You can make a lot of decisions before the card's actually checking if it's okay to play. That is, that's how that interacts. I know it's very boring and texty on the screen, but I do like to try and quantify these somewhat. We then move on to this interaction. Again, just to let people know how this works. Surgeon affects the first card you play each turn with an arcane damage effect. Quick shout out to the fact that it actually says first and not next. It is possible to play something before you use the surgeon and then not get any effect. So, I don't know what crazy scenario you would go under, possibly with somebody playing rewinds on you, but just be aware that's a thing. But the important thing is that it's the next card with an arcane damage effect. X causes an interesting thing of, if X is 0, you are dealing 0 arcane damage. 0 arcane damage is not an arcane effect. So one thing that you see people sometimes trip up and do and not get anywhere with is, if you Surgent and then try and Scour for 0, you will get no damage. Because Surgent looks and goes, Scour is not an arcane damage effect, and it ignores it. This is especially important if you are trying to Scour someone's fealty to get a Surgent proc, and they respond by destroying all the tokens that you've just targeted, because it's damage equal to the numbers destroyed this way. They weren't destroyed that way, and you will get 0. So bear in mind that Scour and anything like it that generates 0 will do 0. It cannot register off Surgeon. It cannot trigger off Amp. You get nothing. Good day, sir. And then the final one we're covering today is this pair. These 2 cards are not the same. So what is interesting is all Decompose functionally works the same apart from Summer's Fall. And that is because Summer's Fall has the word target in it and the others don't. So the way Felling and Plough and any other worse ones that you want to run work is when it attacks, just basically when it goes into the attacking chain to start that process, it creates the trigger. And your opponent gets a window to respond. And then once they've chosen to or not to respond, you get to choose your optional May of Banish. And if you do, the effect just trundles on and they cannot interrupt it. So they can't wait to see if you're going to decompose and then play a card in response. They can't wait to see if you're going to decompose and empty their arsenal. Summer's Fall works entirely different. And it's annoying because if you read it, it reads pretty much exactly the same. But the difference is that it has the word target in, and targets happen at the point that you create the trigger. Which means that Summer's Fall actually forces a sort of double window. It triggers and you pick your target, and then they get their window to mess with it, and then the trigger tries to resolve. And it took me a little bit of digging, and a very helpful friend actually managed to help me find where they even described this, because the devs have been very clear. It was here in the launch documents explaining it. So I put up both Felling and Summer's Fall. So the important thing for felling the crown is the fourth bullet point, I think it is. There is no priority between choosing to banish for the decompose effect and each hero putting a card on the bottom of their deck. Nice and simple. Whereas Summer's Fall gets complicated. If you choose to target an aura, you choose when this card attacks and the trigger's put on the stack. There is priority between choosing the trigger and resolving the trigger. And then if you choose to target an aura and the target becomes invalid or ceases to exist, the trigger fails and you can't banish. So what this functionally just means is when you've got Summer's Fall, if you are desperate for the decompose, do not target fealties. Pretty much only fealty I think that people can get rid of at instant speed, but it's a really meaningful interaction if you are running a Summer and wanting to decompose. I would say this is one that probably affects Florian a tiny bit more, but I do think it's kind of important to know because people can cancel your ability to decompose, and if your game plan, kind of hinges on the idea that you were gonna, you're gonna need to choose 0 auras so that they can't respond and fizzle it. Yeah, that's kind of my rundown. If I find any more of these that I can think of, I'll revisit this and do a video too. But hopefully this has sort of shown you several interactions that you can, use to either play the game better or, if nothing else, to play the game, more correctly. Because obviously not doing these things is, I don't want to say cheating, because cheating implies that you are doing it on purpose, but it's a rules infraction. You don't want to do it. So yeah, hopefully this video has been good for you, and I will see you in the next one.